So, hello and welcome everybody to another Sacred Wisdom podcast. In this podcast today, we are going to talk about the gardens of Tartaria. And by the gardens, we mean about the electroculture, the type of frequencies they used throughout their civilization to improve the plant growth and the environments they lived in. So this was a really interesting. We'll talk a little bit later about someone called Paracelsus, who we've mentioned in the Electroculture Hidden History, who was very interesting. And actually, Stephen found an amazing bit of research where he actually did travel into northern Russia during the German Renaissance period and actually traveled there. But Stephen, how are you doing, my brother?
I'm doing really well, Zach. And how's everything with you?
Fantastic, my brother.
Excellent.
All
That's
is
good to
good.
hear.
Very well. So first and foremost, let's just start with the gardens of Tartaria and how these gardens functioned in a lot differently to how we have gardens today. And
Yeah.
obviously, let's talk. So let's start with a little bit about what was going on in these gardens and what was happening.
So we have to remember that the civilization of Great Tartaria in northern Russia, as with its colonies around planet Earth, was a civilization where the consistent uses of boundless telluric electricity was always present. The Nordic Tartarians, the Turkic peoples that were involved in harnessing this telluric electricity from the ether or the atmosphere around planet Earth obviously use that for lighting, for heating, for transportation purposes. But from some of the actual woodcuts that have come out of the Russian Federation, we know that there's very clear diagrams that display what appears to be sparks of electricity, or shall we say wavering beams of electricity moving over foliage such as trees, shrubs, flowering and non-flowering plants, and what appeared to be rows of fruits or perhaps even vegetables where there's this electricity that's present. And it makes sense when you think about all the buildings that had ground floor and basement electrical capacitors, and all the roof lines of all these various buildings, residential and commercial, and including places of worship, that many of which were repurposed, that we now know as chapels, churches and cathedrals in the white cities of Great Tartaria in northern Russia and elsewhere, where they had these metallic arrays or these metallic antennae or aerials that were able to draw down the telluric electricity. So there would have been a vast and consistent amount of this telluric electricity being distributed across the townships, the white cities of Great Tartaria, and obviously all the surrounding farmland, all the fertile soil where they were growing all these fruits, vegetables, and cereal grains, was then going to be indirectly affected. So we know they were using a type of wide-ranging electroculture, perhaps touching on aspects of electroponics, to actually accelerate the actual growth rates of their fruits, vegetables, and cereal grains in Great Tartaria, but also to maximize the harvestable yields of those edible products. So it's interesting when we think of how many different townships and white cities there were from so many of these medieval cartographic diagrams that we've discussed in previous Sacred Wisdom podcasts that show all these different townships and white cities. For example, the Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples have constructed the white cities of Mulgum, Bayada, Kambulik, and Bargu in northern Tartaria. And additionally, we have the vast Piacida region and Jakutski region of northern Tartaria, which were known to be very large and very fertile agricultural farmland expanses, where the use of a shall we say a Great Tartaria based telluric electricity application process was being used, and we can phrase that today as electroculture.
Do you think the certain plants that they planted were actually tuning into these frequencies? So there was a certain, I mean, we talk just about, vegetable growth and stuff like this, improving the size of vegetables, but there was something going on as well
That's right.
with certain
Yeah.
plants. And I think that ties in,
Yeah.
bringing it up to speed with the botanical gardens that we have as well, and all
Yeah.
this knowledge that was built around the Victorian period.
Yeah. I think so. I think a lot of these these townships and white cities in Great Tartaria in northern Russia were deliberately constructed on potent geomagnetic ley lines, and obviously the immediate farmland or agricultural expanses were therefore affected by those geomagnetic ley lines. Now, we're not going to go into the technical details of how that interacted with the telluric electricity. Perhaps it was a way of directing it in certain areas to again maximize crop yield and the harvestable amount of those fruits, vegetables, and cereal crops in Great Tartaria. So we know, for example, in the white city of Djukagia in the Zukzari region of northern Tartaria, as with the white cities of Dowry and Noeklo in the Owensky region of southern Tartaria, there were enormous palaces, light temples, divine temples, castles, and stately homes that were surrounded by thousands of acres of farmland or fertile agricultural expanses where the use of telluric electricity was obviously transmitted or projected between these various edifices in the townships and white cities in these various locations in Great Tartaria that had a direct effect with the geomagnetic ley lines and the different crops that were growing there. So this was, again, it was designed to stimulate and encourage the microcellular growth in the roots and obviously the stalks and the petals of these various fruits and vegetables to literally maximize or optimize photosynthesis, and how that interplayed with the electrical transmissions that were taking place there. Again, we don't know the exact details, but we know that this was definitely going on. There is a lot of evidence to show this. And so electroculture isn't something that has just emerged in the modern age. It was
Mm.
known during the Georgian period, the Victorian age, and obviously going back to even the medieval age, it was
Certainly.
known, but it's not officially accepted by Western science, as many things aren't, because it conflicts with the consensus narrative they want us all to believe in, which a lot of the time is either a distortion or completely fictional.
Yeah. And just made me think then of the flint, the way the
Yeah,
castles were built out of flint. And
yeah,
as much as, we're told it's because it was protecting, them against cannon fire and things like this, I do believe there was something going on with that. But also as well, yeah, you're right about the tree roots. Now, this science, it's very advanced, into where we're at today, isn't it? I mean,
yeah,
this would have
that's
been,
right.
but yeah, I mean, these roots of the plants and the trees, even just in this country, we know the sacred oak tree. It's a very powerful tree, and
Yeah.
the roots particularly, they connect.
Powerful. Say it became the royal oak tree
Yeah.
of the kings or monarchs of old, going back to the early medieval period, even the Dark Ages. And obviously it was to the Irish Druids, the British Druids was seen as the most sacred tree. The sacred oak was seen more important actually than any other tree species.
And
So
you can
that's
look at
interesting.
these
Yeah.
massive estates and beautiful palaces that have been built, and you can see how the gardens have been designed around them.
Trees were built on Pacific geomagnetic ley lines, so the royal oak would have been placed perhaps on an intersection of two ley lines or more, and therefore it represented on a microcellular level in terms of its anatomical structure, a living organic dimensional portal into the
Mm,
4D holographic reality of the astral plane. And I
mm,
think when we look at Great Tartaria, for example, we know that similar kinds of vast, fertile agricultural expanses or farmland existed around the city of Defert in the Gilyak region of eastern Tartaria, as with the white city of Makodskoy in the Ostaki region of western Tartaria. So the entire landmass expanse of Great Tartaria, many centuries ago in northern Russia, was extremely fertile, as
mm.
perhaps was many other locations in the Arctic North Polar region, which today are now nothing but ice-bound, covered in glacial sheeting and snow.
No,
So,
yeah, that's right.
there's obviously been major shifts in terms of the magnetic field
Mm,
and the jet streams on planet Earth. Uh, Very different than the way it is now in the modern age, going back to the antediluvian period, the Upper Paleolithic, and
mm,
then going through into obviously the early medieval periods, or the Dark Ages into the Renaissance and so forth up into the modern age. And again, a lot of this in terms of historical narratives isn't taught. They don't want us to know about the uses of electroculture or different kinds of, or variable kinds of electroponic growing practices to maximize yields of fruits, vegetables, and cereal grains that were well known is in terms of processes by the Nordic Tartarians and the Turkic peoples of Great Tartaria in northern Russia.
Yeah.
So, a lot of this has been concealed. And I think with the collapse of Great Tartaria and the emergence over many centuries of the Russian Orthodox Church, because you didn't have, going into the Dark Ages, the early medieval period, really a lot of universities. There were some universities, but very, very few seats of official learning. The holders of this concealed knowledge would have been the Russian Orthodox Church.
Yeah.
And then ultimately that would connect to the Eastern Orthodox Church in Constantinople, which was located in Anatolia, which is Western Turkey today. So
Mm.
yeah, again, so that's interesting to note the connection with the religion of Christianity, the holding back of this incredible knowledge on electroculture and variable versions of electroponics that
Yeah.
existed with some prevalence in Great Tartaria, but then
Mm.
that knowledge is held by the Russian Orthodox Church, and
Mm.
that's and I would say it's probably likely that many of the Russian princes that then became the Russian emperors also would have been aware of this kind of knowledge.
Mm. It would have been built integrally to societies at one stage, wouldn't it? And I
Yeah,
mean, obviously, we've looked at the Druids and the information they're shared. So you tipped on that earlier, but does correlate with this, and you can see how this runs parallel to it. There's this ancient knowledge of
yes,
the way this was developed, the way gardens were developed. I do believe it was probably just completely natural, But the really interesting guy who we've mentioned in the hidden history, and I'm not going to say his full name because it's an unbelievably full name. I'm sure Stephen can say it, but that Paracelsus.
yeah,
And
Paracelsus, yeah, it's
Paracelsus.
Paracelsus,
Sorry,
yeah.
I even got that wrong. But
Oh,
Paracelsus, he was, incredible guy. When he traveled to northern Russia, didn't he? So
He
so
traveled, yeah, he traveled prolifically, and yeah, his actual name is a very long name, Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, and yeah, most people know him as Paracelsus. He was a Swiss
Paracelsus.
physician, Swiss alchemist, Swiss theologian, Swiss philosopher of the German Renaissance. Now,
Yeah.
he obviously had traveled to try and garner different levels of knowledge. He didn't
Mm,
really believe that you could really gain a lot of this knowledge from officialdom in terms of going to a college or a university. So he had quite a focused belief that if you just converse with different individuals, including in the Russian Orthodox Church, and he did converse with many of the individuals there. And he discussed with the various deacons, the priests, and the bishops in the Russian Orthodox Church their gardening practices. He was very interested in what they were doing. And we know in the actual Russian Orthodox monasteries, the Russian Orthodox convents, they were using forms of electroculture in enclosed walled spaces to
mm,
accelerate crop growth. And because they were they were self-sustaining. They weren't reliant on the Russian people, the Russian peasantry, if you like, to donate vast numbers of fruits, vegetables, and cereal grains to them to sustain themselves. They did it themselves in their own premises. They
mm,
actually had all their own food supplies that was self-grown.
mm.
And so they were experts when it came to different kinds of cultivation, horticulture, and botany in the Russian Orthodox Church.
So it would have
And I
been
think
using
this is
it
what
would have been
Paracelsus was very interested in finding out more about. And he had initially traveled through obviously the Scandinavian countries, and he'd gone into obviously Norway, Sweden, Norway. Then he traveled across into the Murmansk, as it's known today, in the Kola Peninsula of northwestern Russia, and down into St. Petersburg and Moscow. He was very interested to find out more about their views on medicinal practices, their use of different types of botany. And so he didn't go through the conventional route of going to lecturers or professors at any universities. And at that time, in Russia, for example, medieval Russia, I'll say, there wasn't any colleges or universities. As I said, all the knowledge was held by the Russian Orthodox Church. So he had to go there to speak with them. And yeah, he had some very interesting conversations. He also went, just on a side note, he actually traveled from medieval Russia into the Arabian kingdom that was located in the Fertile Crescent of northern Arabia, which is
Right.
very interesting. So he prolifically traveled and then took all his findings, the knowledge that he'd gained, back to Switzerland in Central Europe. So
So just saying, why do you think that he was set out to do that? Was he like a conquistador going out in the sense of search of this science,
yeah,
this knowledge, and then gaining it, taking it back, and then what that they was
yeah.
it to discover this
Well, I've
information
got a
like a
very
almost like
interesting
an agent? Sorry,
well,
sorry.
I've got a very interesting quote here from John Gordon Hargrave, and he was a Western occultist, an Englishman that was a writer, a researcher into many different subjects. And some people say he was effectively an English polymath. He was self-taught in many areas. But there's an entry in the Encyclopedia Britannica 21, and that's the 15th edition. And I've got it here. It summarizes how he viewed the accumulation of knowledge. So here we go. I'm quoting this now. So the universities do not teach all things. So a doctor must seek out old wives, gypsies, sorcerers, wandering tribes, old robbers, and such outlaws, and take lessons from them. A doctor must be a traveler. And here's the key last part: knowledge is experience.
Yeah,
So
that's
that
very
really
good.
summarizes
Very
his
good.
psychological outlook on why he needed to travel. And
Mm.
he was, as we've already discussed, it was really a founder in the Renaissance period of the early stages of what became electroculture himself. He'd done those investigations himself, and he wanted to further his studies and find out, I think, how the Russian Orthodox Church was really dealing with the usage of it to optimize the crop growth of fruits, vegetables, and cereal grains. They were self sustaining in the Russian Orthodox monasteries and the Russian Orthodox convents, especially in places in Western Russia and in Northern Russia.
What I thought was really interesting is when you look at when I did the hidden history on electroculture and I looked into the imagery around Paracelsus, and it
Yeah,
was incredible that some of the woodcuts, which were a lot of people sort of argue what woodcuts were. They weren't made. They would have taken a long time to build something like that. They were documenting things, but
yeah,
there was shots of almost like him speaking with the animals, and
yes,
actually, I found that interesting. So they're almost that he found a frequency, a communication
yes.
between these, the human and the frequency and these plants and animals and this, something that we're kind of a little bit cut off to now. I
Yes.
well, we are cut off from
Well,
it.
that this is the actual children's story concerning obviously Doctor Doolittle. You've heard of that
Yes, yeah.
story. Doctor Doolittle talks to the animals, but then again, that also
Yeah.
touches on much of Irish Druidism and British Druidism, where they were
Mm,
using forms of electroculture, and it's well known that the Druidic priests were able to communicate with birds and mammals.
right, right. Yeah.
Interesting parallels there. So we know that Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, or Paracelsus, he actually met with the Grand Prince of Moscow and chief sovereign and Grand Prince of all Russia, who was born as Gabriel Ivanovich Rurik, but then later known as Vasily Ivanovich Rurik or Vasily III. So
Right.
Paracelsus then travelled through medieval Russia from around the 17th of December 1523 to the 13th or so September 1526. That second date may vary, it may be slightly off or so, but it was around that time. So I
Right.
find that very interesting. So he had an extensive period of time traveling through medieval Russia. He
Mm,
visited many of the Russian Orthodox monasteries, the Russian Orthodox convents and was really very interested in liaising with the priests, the deacons, and the bishops of the
Mm.
Russian Orthodox Church about their various growing and harvesting practices in terms of botany, horticulture, and farming.
How would you have just walked into these monasteries and gained that kind of knowledge? You must have had a sense of, you know, a presence about him. I don't know, kingship, or in a way, I don't know, like a way
Well,
he was.
from that quote that I read from Encyclopedia Britannica about Paracelsus, it would seem that he obviously was able to network with, shall we say, the Russian peasantry. He was
Mm,
able to network on, in the townships, the cityscapes of medieval Russia. He was
yeah,
very confident, obviously, as a traveler. He may well have employed local individuals, paid them money to help him, obviously, because he may not. I don't think he was fluent in the Russian language.
of course, yeah.
So I know he was fluent in obviously German, and he was fluent in Latin as well. He was an extremely intelligent Swiss polymath. Overall, his level of learning was incredible. But yeah, I think he would have done his research though, Zach. I think he had to prepare his travels. I mean, the fact that he went into Scandinavia and traveled all through Norway, then into Sweden, then into Finland, then into northwestern Russia and down into St. Petersburg and Moscow. Now we know that all around the Moscow, for example, there are very large numbers of Russian Orthodox monasteries and Russian Orthodox convents there. So there's a
Mm,
very large presence of the Russian Orthodox Church. So he would have been traveling a lot. The Russian people would have become very familiar
yeah.
with who he was, his presence, as he was in medieval Russia for quite some time. So
Yeah, and just thinking as well. I mean, how would he have known the locations to go to? Obviously, the maps at that time as well, apparently,
yes,
were
I
very
think he would
limited.
have done a
So,
lot of preparation, and perhaps there were medieval cartographic diagrams or maps
yeah,
that were available at the time. And we can only put it out there as speculation. But did Paracelsus have any awareness or knowledge of the remnants of the white cities of Great Tartaria and
mm,
those that were still present? I mean, because during that period in the German Renaissance, as we
yeah,
know, the Great Tartaria was thriving as a civilization. We have to remember, though, its main area of prolific abundance was really northern Russia and the Arctic North Polar region. As we know from looking at these various medieval maps, we can see very clearly that Western Russia was also known as Muscovite Tartaria. And so there was obviously geopolitical differences there, differences in resource management. We also obviously know the emergence of the Russian Orthodox Church would have been a direct competitor in one way and created a direct geopolitical and religious conflict actually with the civilization of Great Tartaria and northern Russia. Now, again, whether Paracelsus had any knowledge of that is open to speculation, but what we do know is he traveled to medieval Russia and he was there for a long duration of time.
so there isn't any documentation in the sense of the 16th century after Paracelsus. Anybody else was doing electroculture, but you had the French naturalist and called Bernard Germain Attain de la Villa Salon.
That's
Say
right.
that
Yes.
pronunciation. Now that moving on, but
Yeah.
yeah, there was a period that it was kind of just went a bit blank, didn't it? And then it kind
Yes.
of re-emerged. You see, out of the so going back
I
to the
think there was a
gardens.
knowledge grab taking place to try and again we see that with the Dark Ages, the early medieval period. It was called the Dark Ages because the Roman Catholic Church and the Jesuit
Mm,
order, and also obviously the Eastern Orthodox Church, obviously, were very really focused and interested on removing from public access a lot of knowledge that only the priesthoods could have access to and could control and filter that usage or
mm.
application of that knowledge to so the European peasantry, the Russian peasantry, and so on, so that there was a hierarchical control and management system in place where they held on to
Held
a
the
level of
power.
dominance over the minds of humanity, really,
Mm.
simply put.
But again, we're at that point. We're remembering it all, and I think it's
Yeah,
there's a sense we have to. This is where we're at. But it kind of went on. You got P.S. Nicholas Berthelon in 1785,
that's right.
and then you got all these people that kind of came about. Abbey, it was known as Abbey Berthelon as well. but atmospheric electricity. So,
Mhm.
this was going on. And, as also as well, what I find fascinating, which is all, this is all in the hidden history, guys. If you want to look at it, all these people, you can look into a bit more detail on them.
Yeah,
But I found the guy that looked at the Northern Lights. Yeah, I mean, the electroculture is coming back. We're seeing it resurge again, which is really positive, really, really
yeah,
good. But yeah, you've seen at the beginning of the 1900s, you had the Lakowski coil. So you
mm.
had that coming about as well. So this was being, and you had well, I'm just jumping around here, but you had what I thought was really interesting was the Earth battery,
That's
and
right.
that
The Earth
that
battery. That's
and
yeah,
very simple method, and actually based around an actual battery, a positive negative charge. You put the two copper plates there, wire it up through the top. Very
yeah.
simple
You can
method,
create all
and it would
kinds of
charge
coils
the Earth.
with conductive metals such as tin, with
Yeah,
nickel, with iron, with aluminium, and you can coat those in copper sheeting,
yeah,
and they actually create a really good, absorber of the ground-based telluric electricity.
yeah,
And this is fantastic. It creates an electrical field across the fruits, vegetables, and the cereal grains. And I think this is what was being used in the Russian Orthodox monasteries, the Russian Orthodox convents that was seen by Paracelsus was some sort of adaptation or version of these copper, shall we say, copper coated or copper plated coils that were inserted into the soil and perhaps the gravel
mm,
in strategic locations around these harvestable crops. And so again, it's open to speculation, but were these really remnant forms of occult technology that had actually been inherited or been shared by the Nordic
yeah,
Tartarians and the Turkic peoples in northern Russia and the Arctic North Polar region within from the civilization of Great Tartaria with Muscovite Tartary or Muscovite Tartaria in
yeah,
Western Russia, and there was a level of there was a level of kind of like there was an alignment and a sense of geopolitically working together for maybe a few generations. There was a sort of an uneasy sense of cooperation that went on between the civilization of Great Tartaria and what was obviously emerging, which was the Russian Orthodox Church was the power of the Russian monarchy, and really eventually the end of Great Tartaria. But obviously, this is again, as I've explained many times before, there wasn't one event. This happened over a long period of time.
yeah. What I found really interesting is looking at the Lakowski coil and how literally the way the metals are wound together with each other. So this is obviously
Yeah.
creating some sort of vortex current.
Mm.
The way it's picking up this atmospheric electricity, and this is harnessed into the earth somehow. and
Yeah.
and you can do there are a lot of methods out there, so there's
Mm.
different ways, forms of electroculture, isn't there? But yeah, it's like and I believe it will get more and more prevalent in society. It will get put out bit by bit. I think that's which is a shame. It would be nice if it was all out there, but I think there's a lot more information that will come out about
Yeah.
electroculture.
So we asked whether Paracelsus, for example, if he was seemingly so fascinated with these various growing practices in medieval Russia. Again, we know that he was very into meeting with individuals that weren't employed as lecturers or professors in the colleges and universities, and there wasn't colleges and universities in existence at the time, as I've said already, in
Yeah,
medieval
it was.
Russia. But
Yeah,
so the actual patriarch of Moscow and Russia at the time was known as Daniel Vladimirovich Grechinov. Some people knew him as Daniel Vladimirovich Grechinov. Now, this individual was also known as Daniel the Patriarchate, and
right,
he was the supreme overseer as the Metropolitan of Moscow and all Russia in the Russian Orthodox Church.
right.
So Paracelsus more than likely met with him and held conversations with him to try and get some insight really into the kind of knowledge that was held by the Russian Orthodox Church, and
Mm,
not just to do with electroculture or the various kinds of electroponics, but also any other kind of technical endeavors that they had schematics for, or technical diagrams, perhaps maps of different lost civilizations, perhaps connected to even Hyperborea. Again, I'm just putting out there a speculation. We know there was a lot of highly advanced occult technology used in
Yeah,
Hyperborea in northern Russia in the Arctic
sure.
North Polar region. He was a very unique individual. Paracelsus had a completely different mindset to many of the other individuals who were seen as academics at the time, and was largely rejected by more conventional academics in Western Europe
So yeah,
during
he
the
was
German
rejected,
Renaissance.
right? So that's what that I find interesting. He was rejected in that
Yeah,
way, right? So he wasn't accepted. Okay, because
yeah.
right, okay, yeah. I mean, this is
We're
sad.
starting to see a pattern emerging. So
Mm,
Nikola Tesla was eventually rejected. Victor Schauberger was eventually rejected. So any individual that doesn't toe the line, doesn't accept the editing process that goes on, the filtering, it doesn't accept the consensus version of the 3D holographic reality in this material dimension that is presented, and they
yeah.
have to agree to go along, then they're accepted, and then they're actually recognized as having some credibility, which is kind of ludicrous, really.
It's a
Because
shame because it could actually, there's so much growth in the,
yeah,
literally, we're talking about growth and expansion and all this stuff, but there seems to be a very fearful mind state of these, of this energy. I call it the energy for now, but we'll
yeah.
go into one. Maybe we will go into one day
Is
what
that
it
is that
is.
energy with a capital E, like inverted commas? What is that
You know,
energy?
well, I mean, we kind of it's got to a point where it's quite difficult to discuss certain things, and it's
Yes.
where we're limited on what we have to say, and it's restricting consciousness. It's I find the electroculture. I grow my own veg, and it's something that I want to input into all the stuff I do, and I think that that's actually what I'm going to do on the channel is do some more of that and actually show some practical methods because I just find it
Yeah.
incredible. But yeah, it would lovely to get the all the records of Paracelsus. Where do you think this information is now? Like here, all his research and what he discovered.
All his books are either in the German language or in the Latin language. So yeah, and a lot of them have been translated into the lingua anglica or the English language.
Right.
They're out there. But yes, again, because he was really classed as being pseudo-scientific in his outlook, he's not taken seriously. But he actually was quite a unique individual, and it was because of that unique method of thought, his cognitive processes,
Mm,
that really allowed him to develop the early stages of electroculture during the German Renaissance in Switzerland, in Central Europe. And the fact that he was willing to so extensively travel through Norway, through Sweden, through Finland, and then across medieval Russia, both in Western Russia and in Northern Russia. And
yeah.
he knew exactly which individuals were going to hold the knowledge, who were preserving that knowledge in manuscripts and various documents.
Yeah.
That itself is a unique method of thinking.
Mm.
And he didn't really bother with colleges that were in existence at the time, or universities that were in the existence at the time in parts of Western Europe. He didn't see it as credible because he knew that there was this editing process that was going on, and he'd already really been largely rejected by the more conventional academics in Western Europe. He struck out and did his own thing.
The interesting thing is from all the stuff we've looked at, like when you start looking at all the pseudoscientists, one of which was obviously Victor Scharberger,
Yeah,
it is that actually they were the guys that were actually the forerunners and actually making these incredible inventions and doing all the amazing work.
absolutely.
But then
Yeah,
they're
I
always
totally
branded as
agree.
a
Yeah,
pseudoscientist. It's ridiculous. Actually,
yeah.
Lakowski as well, George Lakowski, he's seen as a pseudoscientist. He was quite
He is.
dismissed,
That's right.
and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
the shame. But yeah, I mean, you only have to look at this constant censorship of stuff that's gone on in information, and it's kind of again, I always bring it up to the now and where we are now. We need to bring this back into society. We need to you know understand this information, and it's all there, like the internet.
Imagine over 100 years ago, if the occult technology of Nikola Tesla was suddenly commercialized and mass produced,
Amazing.
distributed on this on planet Earth. Now, that would have also been able to be integrated and used to grow huge fruits, vegetables, and cereal grains that could have fed all the Homo sapiens or human beings on planet Earth, all this, lack of and oversupply of and lack of abundance, all these conceptual perceptions would have all just faded away. It'd all be gone because it wouldn't be, and it's not really what human beings really should be focusing on anyway.
Yeah,
So there's a lot more going on out there, and I think
that's kind of what I was going
yeah,
to go on to, is that, that opposing force is that it's so intense that
yeah, it's so
you think,
repetitive.
well,
It is.
and it's repetitive as well over history, and you think,
Yeah,
well, you're kind of giving the game away, like the being like that. You could actually be, less subtle. You could be quite subtle, and you could actually give and let humanity develop in a way. But then again, that is maybe down to our own ignorance, and that's
yeah,
where we're not developing. And as we know, in today's age, we only look around and we see how many people don't actually want to develop. They actually
no,
like, some people like staying asleep and staying in
yeah.
that docile state.
The
And
problem with
that's,
being in a state of arrested development all the time is you're always in a kind of existential loop,
yeah.
going pretty much nowhere, and then really psychologically and emotionally, individuals start to slowly stagnate. They're not
Mm,
cultured, and they're not interested in being critical thinkers who are
mm,
individuals who are creative, self-motivated, resourceful in a very positive and proactive way. They're always wanting to await the next big thing, somebody somewhere telling them. And we see this problem emerging in alternative media and overall in the whole of the new age movement,
of course.
where there's so much cynicism, and where there could be so many individuals providing really positive and productive, helpful information, and they're just basically, always focusing on negatively based rubbish that's of
Yeah.
no benefit or help to any human being, and actually is highly destructive. It
Yeah.
doesn't provide jobs, it doesn't provide training, it doesn't provide inspiration, it doesn't provide ways out, it doesn't show people really practically how to redevelop their lives and actually become self-motivated, independent, and focused on what they're doing, and have a passion for what they're doing, and to believe in themselves. That's something else the alternative media doesn't do. It doesn't really instill a sense of self-belief and self-worth in most people.
No,
And I think when
no.
it comes to electroculture, which is a kind of electroponics, if
Yeah.
more people were encouraged and it became a form of, that was the form of predictive programming and culture creation to get millions of Homo sapiens or human beings on planet Earth involved in growing their own fruits, vegetables, and cereal grains, and community gardens, community raised beds where people could literally just harvest different kind of herbal plants, for example, and use them in salads. Just really basic things that can
Yeah.
be done on a much wider scale.
Yeah.
But there just isn't that motivation in a lot of people
And if
to
people
move
stood up
forward.
and did that and actually stopped going down all these rabbit holes, these negative rabbit holes, and actually did, every street has their own garden and electroculture garden, and they all concentrated, and there was almost a knowledge base around that we will start integrating this back more and more. But at presently, there is a majority of people that do quite like sitting down and letting other people take care of their business. So
Yeah,
that's something to understand,
not a very positive mindset to think that way.
No,
It's very counterproductive. And corporations aside, any form of localism, especially in the Western world now, is essential that develops and thrives. And it needs
of course.
individuals to be self-motivated and just to make that effort, change their own cognitive processes, and say, look, things are stuck in the 3D holographic reality of this material dimension because a lot of us don't do really anything. We're very unmotivated. Individuals that could do something don't really go the next step. And what
No.
they should do is do that and go, who cares? Just go for it.
And this is,
And they're not
bringing it
interested.
up to speed. There's again, leaving, I always like to leave it on a positive. This is the where electroculture is amazing, because we can all discover this and actually have some fun, because we can actually see some development, actually go out and plant things, maybe out in the wild, some places we could do that as well, as long as we're
Yeah.
not harming
And look
nature
what
and harming the
Paracelsus
earth.
and look exactly, but look what Paracelsus did. He was in the German Renaissance.
Yeah.
They didn't have all these trains. There wasn't automobiles. They didn't have dual carriageways and motorways. They didn't have the more advanced kinds of transportation we have in the modern age. But
Yeah.
what did he do? he got on a horse and
Yeah.
he traveled for years and years.
Yeah.
He traveled in Scandinavia. He traveled into Western Russia and Northern Russia. He traveled all over and accumulating a lot of different diverse knowledge and
Mm.
experiences from different cultures and different individuals. If somebody can do that hundreds of years ago,
You do now.
and that was one individual. Paracelsus was an amazing individual, really, when you think
Mm.
about what he achieved. It's quite profound. So if he
Incredible.
can do it, nobody's expected to get up and go traveling all over planet Earth to learn, unless they want to, different kinds of knowledge, but just making that little bit of effort. Because I find
Yeah.
that a lot of individuals get very frustrated and they've got a defeatist mindset and a
Mm.
very negative outlook, but they don't provide any solutions, which doesn't make any sense. Because then again, as I'm reiterating, they're just going round and round in an incarnation loop. It's
Yeah,
pointless.
that's right. And they're caught up in the very matrix that they don't like, and
And it's
caught up.
all ego based,
Yeah.
and it's very much really connected to Western materialism, but it's nothing to do with spirituality. And I think really the essence of much of growing your own fruits and vegetables is really a spiritual process more than
Mm.
just the biological, practicalities of fertile soil and the seasons and
Yeah.
de-weeding and all the different things that you would define in horticulture and gardening, really.
Yeah. Brilliant, Steve. Well, thank you so much, my brother. It was absolutely
That's
incredible.
all
And
right.
thank you for that research on Paracelsus. It's amazing. And really, there's probably more we'll
There's a
discover
lot.
about. Oh, there is a lot more,
We had to condense this down for the Sacred Wisdom podcast. So
But well done, Steve. That's brilliant. Thank you. And our book is available on Amazon in paperback and ebook. And it's quite a big book, that one. So a lot of research in there. Thank you, Stephen. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
no, I can't think of anything else. I think I've pretty much said everything I want to in this presentation. It's been very, very interesting.
Great. And it's a bye for me.
And it's goodbye from me.